A courtroom, a black woman accused by a white cop of something she didn't do. The tension is thick, but no one knows the shocking truth about who she really is. When the cop lies under oath, he has no idea that the woman in front of him is no ordinary civilian. What happens next will shake everyone to their core because she's a high-ranking Navy SEAL, and the truth is about to come out. But this isn't just a battle in court, it's the beginning of a fight that will change everything. Who will come out on top? It was a typical courtroom setting, tension in the air, murmurs of gossip, and the judge, a seasoned officer of the law, sitting in the front. But today was different. Today the case was against Officer Daniels, a cop who had a reputation for making questionable decisions. He stood at the stand with a smug look on his face, as if he had the upper hand. His story was simple. He claimed that the woman, a black woman named Ashley, had assaulted him during a routine traffic stop. He was the victim, he said. He described how she had gotten aggressive when asked to step out of the car, how she tried to grab his gun and resist arrest. But the truth? It was far from what he painted it to be. Ashley sat in the defendant's chair, calm and collected. Her posture was relaxed, but there was a quiet power about her. She wasn't just any woman, she was a high-ranking Navy SEAL, a seasoned veteran who had served her country in ways most could never imagine. She had been through more intense situations than Officer Daniels could ever handle, yet she wasn't there to show off her rank or her combat skills. She was there for justice. The prosecutor, a sharp and confident woman, stood up to cross-examine Daniels. She asked him to walk through the events in more detail, questioning every inconsistency in his account. Officer Daniels stumbled. His confident attitude started to waver as the prosecutor pointed out the flaws in his story. His accusations seemed more fabricated with each passing moment. Ashley sat quietly, watching it all unfold. Her mind was focused, waiting for her moment. When the prosecutor finished, she stood up. The courtroom fell silent, eyes now on her. "Your Honor, I'd like to make a statement," Ashley said, her voice calm but firm. The judge nodded, giving her the floor. Ashley took a deep breath before speaking, revealing who she truly was. "I am Captain Ashley Carter, a Navy SEAL officer with over 15 years of service. I've trained for years to stay calm under pressure, to handle situations where lives are on the line. And I'll tell you this, I've never, not once, assaulted an officer." She then calmly recounted the actual events of that day, how Officer Daniels had approached her vehicle aggressively, how she had complied with every order, and how it was he who had escalated the situation. She described with precision the exact actions that led to the misunderstanding. It was clear to anyone paying attention she was telling the truth. But the real kicker came when she mentioned the special training she'd undergone, the respect she commanded in her field, and the way she had handled similar situations with dignity. She wasn't just any person, she was a leader. The courtroom was stunned into silence. Officer Daniels, who had spent the entire morning weaving his tale, now looked like a deer caught in headlights. The judge, who had initially appeared impartial, exchanged a glance with the prosecutor. There was no longer any doubt. Ashley had won. The truth had come out. But more than that, the officer who had attempted to belittle her had just been exposed for the liar he was. The courtroom erupted into whispers, but Ashley remained calm. She'd been through far worse and had learned one thing. Truth always rises, no matter how hard people try to bury it. As the gavel echoed through the room, the atmosphere was electric with disbelief and awe. People who had been quietly observing the proceedings, unsure of what was truly happening, were now murmuring among themselves, processing the truth they had just heard. Officer Daniels stood frozen, his once confident posture now broken. His face had turned pale and his eyes darted around the courtroom, desperately seeking a way to salvage the situation. But it was too late. The damage had been done. The judge cleared his throat, his voice now firm. "Officer Daniels," he began, addressing the cop who had just lied under oath. "Your actions here today have not only betrayed the trust of the people you swore to protect, but you've also undermined the very foundation of the justice system. You will be investigated for perjury, and your conduct as an officer will be reviewed immediately." Ashley stood there, her head held high. She wasn't celebrating, though. This was never about exposing someone's flaws. It was about ensuring that justice prevailed. But that didn't mean she wasn't proud. Proud of the woman she had become, proud of how she had handled herself, despite the ugly accusations thrown her way. The prosecutor approached Ashley as the courtroom began to clear. "I have to say, you handled that with incredible grace," she said. "It's not every day we see someone with your caliber of composure under pressure. Thank you for your service." Ashley smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Thank you. It's just what we do," she replied, her voice calm, but with a quiet strength that everyone in the room could feel. As she made her way out of the courtroom, Ashley knew the world would soon know the truth about Officer Daniels. The headlines would write themselves. But for her, this victory wasn't about the headlines or the recognition. It was about doing what was right, about making sure that no one would ever try to dismiss her or others like her again. Outside, the bright sun shone down on her, and for a moment, Ashley closed her eyes, letting the warmth wash over her. She had faced adversity countless times, but today it was different. Today justice had been served, and for once it felt like the world had taken a step in the right direction. She turned and walked away from the courthouse, ready for whatever came next, knowing that no matter what, she had stood her ground. And in that moment, that was enough. As Ashley walked away from the courthouse, she felt the weight of the day lifting off her shoulders. The air outside felt fresher, as if the world was finally starting to shift in her favor. She had come to expect the world to challenge her, especially as a black woman in a position of power. But this was different. The people who had once doubted her now had no choice but to respect her. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking her moment of reflection. She pulled it out and saw several notifications. Messages flooded in, both from old friends and new admirers. Among them was a text from her commanding officer in the Navy, simply reading, "You did good today, Captain. Proud of you." Ashley smiled to herself. It wasn't the recognition she was after, but it was always nice to hear that from those who truly understood the weight of the job she carried. As she headed to her car, her mind wandered to the future. Officer Daniels's career was as good as over, but she knew there were still many others like him in positions of power. It was just the beginning of a much bigger battle. But if there was one thing she had learned in her years of service, it was that she wasn't afraid of a challenge. Before she could start her engine, her phone rang again. This time, it was a call from the local news station. "Ashley?" the voice on the other end said. "We'd like to offer you an interview. We want to hear your side of the story. The public deserves to know what really happened." Ashley hesitated. She wasn't sure she wanted to take the spotlight, not for herself. But then she thought about the bigger picture, the stories that needed to be told. So after a brief pause, she answered with quiet resolve. "I'll do it," she said. "But let's make sure the focus stays on the truth. That's what matters." The interview was scheduled for later that afternoon. She spent the drive there reflecting on what she would say. She knew she wasn't just speaking for herself now, she was speaking for anyone who had been unjustly accused, for anyone whose voice had been drowned out by lies. When Ashley arrived at the studio, she was greeted by a team of journalists who immediately led her into a bright, sterile interview room. As the cameras turned on, the host introduced her with a warm smile, but Ashley could tell there was a sense of nervous energy in the air. They were eager to hear what she had to say. The host asked the typical questions at first, about her service, about the courtroom drama. But Ashley, ever composed, answered each one with measured clarity. When the conversation turned to Officer Daniels, she didn't focus on the man himself. Instead, she spoke about the systemic issues that led to situations like this, how people in power often overlooked the truth when it didn't suit their narrative, how black women in particular had to fight twice as hard to be taken seriously. "It's not just about me," she said, her voice strong. "It's about every person who has ever been underestimated, every person who has ever been pushed aside because of who they are, where they come from, or how they look. I want them to know that their voice matters, the truth matters." As the interview wrapped up, the host thanked her for her time, and the camera crew signaled the end of the segment. Ashley felt a sense of satisfaction, not because she'd just gone on live TV, but because she had used the platform to speak about something bigger than herself. When the interview aired later that evening, the city watched. And while some people had expected the usual drama of a scandalized cop or a victimized civilian, what they saw was something more profound, a woman of honor standing firm in her truth and calling for change. In the days that followed, public opinion shifted. There were calls for an investigation into Officer Daniels's record, protests demanding accountability, and rallies calling for greater justice reform. Ashley's message had resonated far beyond the courtroom. She had ignited something that could not be easily put out. But more than that, she had proven something that few could argue with. The truth, no matter how difficult, would always find its way to the surface. As the days passed, Ashley's life began to change in ways she hadn't anticipated. The interview had gone viral, and while it brought with it a wave of support from many, it also stirred the pot for others. Some admired her bravery, while others found themselves uncomfortable with the shift in the status quo. Her name was everywhere, in headline social media posts, and even dinner table discussions. But with the newfound attention came a challenge she hadn't expected, the pressure of being a voice for so many. She found herself constantly speaking with reporters, community leaders, and activists. Everyone wanted her opinion, her perspective, her leadership. And while Ashley was honored by the attention, there were moments when she longed for the quiet, for the solitude she had grown accustomed to during her years in service. One evening, as she was walking out of a meeting with a local advocacy group, her phone rang again. This time, it was from her Navy SEAL mentor, someone who had been a guiding force in her career. "Ashley, you're doing great," her mentor's voice said, "but I need you to remember something. Leadership is not just about the battles you fight on the outside. It's about knowing when to take a step back and focus on your own well-being. Don't let this cause burn you out." Ashley paused, absorbing the advice. She had always prided herself on pushing through the toughest situations, but her mentor was right. She had been running on adrenaline, and now the weight of everything was beginning to catch up with her. "Thanks," she replied. "I'll keep that in mind." Later that night, Ashley sat in her living room, watching the sunset. The quietness felt good. It allowed her to think about her next steps, the direction she wanted to take not only for herself, but for the causes she now represented. The public's attention on her was something she hadn't asked for, but it had become an opportunity, and she wasn't about to waste it. The next morning, she reached out to the local community leaders she'd been in touch with and proposed an initiative. It was time to take action beyond words. She suggested organizing a series of community forums, events where people could come together to discuss not only the issues she had faced, but also the systemic challenges they were facing every day. The first event was scheduled in a local town hall. Ashley knew it wasn't going to be easy. Some people in the community still had doubts about her. They might see her as someone who had made it and was now using her platform to preach. But she wasn't there for popularity. She was there for change. As the day of the forum approached, Ashley felt the familiar stir of nerves. But this time, they were different. They weren't fueled by fear, they were fueled by anticipation. She knew this could be the moment where real change began, where people would start to realize they didn't have to fight alone. The evening arrived, and the town hall was packed. The room buzzed with energy as people from all walks of life filed in. Ashley took her seat at the front, the spotlight on her once again. She could see the curiosity, the skepticism, but also the hope in the eyes of the people around her. They were waiting to hear something real. When the event began, Ashley stood up, looking out at the crowd. The room fell silent as her voice rang clear. "I'm here not as a Navy SEAL, not as someone with a title or rank," she began. "I'm here as someone who has walked through hell, just like many of you. I've fought battles, I've been wronged, and I've had to work harder than most just to be seen. But I'm also here because I believe in something bigger than all of that. I believe in the power of our voices, and I believe that together we can make a change that will last." She spoke for over an hour, touching on the importance of justice, the need for accountability, and most importantly, the strength that comes from unity. She didn't offer easy solutions, but she offered hope, a pathway forward. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. It wasn't just applause for her, it was applause for what she represented. The crowd wasn't just reacting to a speaker, they were reacting to a movement that had begun right there in that town hall. Ashley had sparked something much greater than herself. As the event ended and people began to filter out, some stopped to thank her, to express their gratitude. She wasn't just a figurehead anymore, she was a symbol of resilience, of truth, and of the power to create change. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The town hall event had sparked a chain reaction, with similar forums being held in neighboring communities. Ashley's initiative had created a ripple effect. Everywhere she went, people were eager to join the movement, to be a part of something bigger than themselves. The conversations she had started about accountability, justice, and systemic change were no longer just whispers. They were loud, they were real, and they were happening everywhere. But with this momentum came greater challenges. Ashley found herself balancing her Navy SEAL duties, her newfound role as an activist, and the public's insatiable demand for her time. It was overwhelming, but she knew that if she didn't take this opportunity, the movement would lose its momentum. She had to push through. One evening, as she sat in her office after a long day, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from her mentor, and the words were simple but struck her like a jolt of electricity. "Are you still taking care of yourself?" Ashley stared at the screen, feeling the weight of the question. She had been so focused on the mission, on changing the system, on fighting for justice, that she had lost sight of herself. She had given so much to others that she hadn't left time to heal, to recharge, or even to check in with her own heart. She took a deep breath and made a decision. She had to step back, just for a little while, to ensure she could keep fighting in the long run. She wasn't going to allow herself to burn out. She wasn't going to let the cause be lost because she couldn't manage her own limits. The next morning, Ashley sent out a message to her team and her supporters. "I need to take a short break to focus on my health and well-being." This movement is bigger than one person, and I trust that the momentum we've built will continue. I'll be back soon, but right now I need to step away and reset. Thank you for your understanding. The response was overwhelming. People expressed nothing but support and understanding. They knew she had given everything she could, and they were proud of her. Her absence, they assured her, would be temporary, and the work would carry on. During her break, Ashley took time to reconnect with old friends, to visit places she hadn't been to in years, and to just breathe. She spent time with her family, sat quietly by the ocean, and reminded herself of the reason she had started this journey in the first place. She reconnected with the person she was before the public eye, before the whirlwind of activism, and before the lies of one man had brought her to the forefront of an entire movement. One evening, as she watched the sunset from a beach near her childhood home, she realized something important. The movement wasn't just about taking down one bad cop, or even about justice in a courtroom. It was about the collective strength of people coming together, fighting for the world they wanted to live in. It was about people realizing that their voices mattered, their stories mattered, and that together they could create the change they needed. When Ashley returned to the public eye, she did so with renewed energy. She spoke at rallies, met with lawmakers, and continued to push for the changes she believed in. But now she did it with a stronger sense of balance. She had learned that change was a marathon, not a sprint. She knew that self-care wasn't a luxury, it was essential to keep fighting for what mattered. The impact of her work continued to grow, and more people joined the cause. Officer Daniels had been fired, but Ashley knew that his downfall was just the tip of the iceberg. There were more battles to fight, more systems to challenge, and more stories to tell. But Ashley also knew that no matter how many battles she fought, no matter how much the world demanded of her, she would never lose sight of what mattered most: the truth, the strength of the people, and the unyielding belief that real change was possible. As Ashley's journey continued, the movement she had ignited gained more momentum. The discussions that had started in small community forums were now taking place on national platforms, on TV networks, in social media trends, and at local council meetings. People across the country were rallying behind the cause of justice reform, using Ashley's story as the spark for their own fight against corruption and inequality. But as her influence grew, so did the challenges. She was invited to speak at conferences, universities, and political gatherings. Every time she spoke, her words were carefully listened to, her calls for accountability, for reform, for unity, echoing through rooms and across the airwaves. Her voice had become a beacon for those seeking justice, but Ashley knew that with this spotlight came new pressures. There were those who tried to silence her, to discredit her, to twist her words. They didn't want to acknowledge the truth she was shining a light on. One day, while she was preparing for a major speech in front of a government committee, Ashley received a letter in the mail. It was unmarked, plain and simple. At first, she wasn't sure whether it was worth opening, but something told her to. As she read the letter, her heart sank. It was a thinly veiled threat, warning her to stop her efforts or face consequences. It wasn't the first time she had received something like this, but this one felt different, more personal, more pointed. Ashley felt a moment of doubt, of vulnerability. It wasn't the first time she'd felt the pressure of being a symbol for change, but this letter was a stark reminder that there were those who wanted her to fail. She sat in silence for a while, letting the words sink in. And then, as she had done countless times before, she made a decision. She wouldn't let fear control her. She wouldn't let intimidation stop her. If anything, this was the moment that would define her resilience even more. She picked up the phone and called her mentor. "I received a letter today," she said, trying to steady her voice. "I think they want me to back down." There was a pause on the other end before her mentor's voice responded, calm and unwavering. "Ashley, you've been through worse than this. This is just another attempt to break you. Let them try. They can't stop you." Ashley took a deep breath. It was exactly the strength she needed to hear. "I won't stop," she said with resolve. "Not now. Not ever." And she didn't. The speech she gave to the government committee was one of her most powerful yet. She spoke not just about the need for justice reform, but about the personal responsibility that everyone in power had to act with integrity. She spoke about the dangers of complacency, about how those who had the ability to change the system often chose not to because it was easier to maintain the status quo. But she was done with the status quo, and she wasn't going to stop fighting until real, tangible change was made. The impact of her speech rippled through the halls of government and across the country. Lawmakers were forced to take notice, and public pressure mounted for real policy changes. In the weeks that followed, several cities initiated police reform measures. New bills aimed at improving accountability and transparency within law enforcement agencies were introduced in Congress. But Ashley knew the fight was far from over. There would be pushback, there would be setbacks, and there would be moments when she would have to question the cost of this work. But she was ready for it. She was stronger than she had ever been. One evening, as she sat in her living room reflecting on the progress, she received a message from a woman she had never met. The message simply read, "Thank you. Your story gave me the courage to stand up for what's right. You're making a difference." Ashley stared at the screen for a long time. That message, coming from someone who had never met her, but who had been inspired by her strength, reminded her of the reason she had taken this path in the first place. She wasn't doing this for the accolades or the recognition. She was doing it for the people who didn't have a voice, for the ones who had been silenced for far too long. As Ashley sat back, the weight of everything she had accomplished and still had yet to achieve washed over her. The road ahead would be difficult, but it would be worth it. She had started a movement, and the ripple effect was only growing. She had ignited something that could change the world, one person, one community at a time. As Ashley's journey continued, the movement she had ignited gained more momentum. The discussions that had started in small community forums were now taking place on national platforms, on TV networks, in social media trends, and at local council meetings. People across the country were rallying behind the cause of justice reform, using Ashley's story as the spark for their own fight against corruption and inequality.